What is going on, Tender Crew? My name is Billy Skwid, and today I want to talk about every criticism I have heard from the Elden Ring Network Test. That's right, the Elden Ring Network Test has come, it has gone, and people are still talking about it as they should, because Elden Ring has and will remain, up until its release, one of the most anticipated games of 2022. Big February launch time, very excited, but there are a lot of people being very vocal, both positively and negatively, about what Elden Ring is going to offer and what to expect from the game. And there's been a lot of vocal opinions criticizing some of the things that went on with the network test. So today, I want to get down and dirty and talk about every one of those criticisms that I have seen and kind of give my take on them. I want to get your opinions on them as well, so please let me know down in the comments below if you agree with these criticisms or if you think they are overreacting. But let's get into it! And the first criticism I want to get into myself is how the network test was dealt out. Oddly enough, this is the first time that I've ever seen a network test or a beta actually have controversy about how it was released. Usually people are kind of peeved off if it's set behind like a pre-order bonus, like, yeah, pre-order and get into the early access alpha for free. That stuff usually pisses people off, but in a raffle type system where you put your name into a bin and then it's randomly generated who gets them and who doesn't, there's usually not too much controversy, but somehow, some way there is with this. And it comes from a few main points. One was the fact that a lot of these network test codes ended up being resold on like eBay and stuff like that for $200, $300, which is ridiculous for a temporary network test. That's more than the game. That's more than a few copies of the game. That's more than the collector's edition of the game, just to get a little bit of early access into it. And I understand if you're a content creator and you are desperate to get some of that content for your channel, for your stream, whatever you want to do, and you have the expendable income, yes, it makes sense. But it is very, very bizarre that this is the first really public issuing of a beta having this problem. I'm sure it's not exclusive to Elden Ring. I'm sure it's been done in the past, but this is the first mainstream like coverage of this kind of a practice taking place. On top of that, there are reports, and I've seen a lot of data tables on this, and it does seem to be fairly accurate that a ridiculously high number of the network test codes that were given out to EU players, with North America having a very low percentage of codes sent out. Now, this could be a number of different things, whether it was an error with the code distribution, or whether it's the fact that EU just has a significant amount more people in it and more people that were interested in the network test. I understand that some of the big content creators and stuff, they did not have to worry about getting their code. Hell, they were even given codes to distribute amongst their communities. So those guys don't really factor in. But for the average Joe like myself, it does kind of seem a little fishy, but I would chalk it up more to EU just having a higher population density. But if you guys know anything more about this, let me know down in the comments below, because I am very interested in this. I do think it is interesting. At first, I was kind of peeved off whenever I saw that EU had such a high proportion of the codes given out, but now that I'm thinking about it, in hindsight, it does make sense. So let me know if there's any validity to people being upset about this. Last thing I want to bring up, and it's just kind of a little funny aside, was people being upset that Bandai Namco made an oopsie when they were sending out their surveys. They ended up, I think, sending out surveys to the majority of people that actually signed up for the network test, whether they got into it or not. And you probably received an email, whether you got into it or not, saying, hey, respond to this survey about how you felt about the network test, and that's impossible to do if you didn't play it. They soon issued an apology email afterwards saying that there was an error with their system and that those emails should not have been sent out. I just thought it was kind of funny. I was like, make me sad again, Bandai. Make me sad again. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the actual gameplay now that we've talked about the code distribution and all that. And one of the criticisms I'm seeing is people saying that magic is too strong, weapons are too weak. And in the network test, yeah, it does seem like that from a surface level. Spells are doing ridiculous amounts of damage, whereas your great swords are barely able to chunk a quarter of the damage that a spell is able to cast out. And this comes from a few different reasons. One is the fact that magic just naturally scales better in early game. It always has, it always will. your spells are always going to have a little bit more power than a traditional weapon would be. And the caveat to that is the fact that it is a limited resource. Yes, you can farm mobs and you'll get your Estus flasks back with blue and health flasks, which will let you recharge. But at the end of the day, it is still a finite resource. And being able to have a little bit more oomph onto those early game really does matter. Secondly, though, is the fact that weapons can only go up to +3. And weapon scaling, as far as stats goes, like if you're pumping points into dexterity or strength, really does not start to matter until 5 and up in most of these Souls games. Most of the time, if you're doing an early game build, you are going to want to put your points into health, you're going to want to put your points into stamina. If you're going magic, you want to go into mind and stuff like that. But you just typically want to ride the coattails of whatever the stat requirements are for the weapon, and then kind of build up your character from there. Once you hit the +5s or so, you can start really pounding points into the damage stats. Unless you're going for a glass cannon build or you're trying to do some sort of like speed run or stuff like that, then damage always wins, even the smallest amount of damage. But up until you get to a decent weapon level, you're not going to have that good of returns in the damage department as far as stats go. So I think people are kind of seeing that weapons aren't scaling that well, and they're concerned that weapons are going to be weak, magic is going to be OP. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think magic is going to be very, very balanced. I think weapons, once you actually get points put into them, are going to be very, very good. On to the next gameplay element, power stancing. It has returned, but it is in a different form than what we saw it in Dark Souls 2. And a lot of people are upset that you're not able to power stance weapons outside of their weapon class. You're not going to be able to combine that ultra club or ultra great sword with, say, a scimitar or whatnot, and be able to power stance it proper. And people think this is lazy design from Software, them making it so that it has to be weapon class specific, maces with maces, scimitars with scimitars, great swords with great swords, that kind of thing. I both see what people are saying and disagree. In Dark Souls 2, the way it tended to work was you would take the power stance moveset of whatever the highest hyper armor weapon was. So if you had, say, a longsword and a greatsword, you would do the greatsword movesets. No matter whether you had the longsword in your right or your left hand, it tended to stick to whatever the heaviest, whatever the slowest weapon variety was. This was to prevent people from, say, stacking a dagger in the right hand and a great hammer in the left hand and being able to do dagger moves. Kind of similar to what Skyrim does, where whatever's in your right hand, it takes the speed of your dual wielding up. So you can have like Mehrunes' dagger in one hand and a mace in the other hand, just be able to whip through people no problem. That is not the case in this, and is honestly not that far off from what Dark Souls 2 had. Yes, you're not going to be able to have those combinations, but in most situations, those combinations weren't optimal to begin with in Dark Souls 3. They were more stylings, and I understand people are saying, well, yeah, it wasn't optimal to power stance them in most situations, but you still had the ability to cycle from one moveset to the other. That is 100% true. You are going to need to take a little bit more consideration into what you are bringing and potentially have a third weapon on the offhand if you're wanting to cycle through moves. It does limit that, but that's really the only thing that it's limiting from this power stance. It is definitely a quote-unquote worse version of power stance than what Dark Souls 2 had, but I don't think it's worth really getting upset about, and I think it's a cleaner way for From Software to limit assets. Next up, I want to talk about the big topic that a lot of people are choosing to criticize Elden Ring about, and that is the reuse of assets, both in animations, in enemy designs, and stuff like that. Listen, at the end of the day, this is a From Software game. They have a pool of assets that they can pull through at any time. I've seen a bunch of people saying that, well, this is a completely new IP. They shouldn't be taking as much from Dark Souls and Sekiro as they have for a fresh new IP. And what I think people aren't really focusing on is, as a gaming culture, we are really predisposed these days to focusing on the negative. And I see it more as an, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And some of those animations do stand the test of time. They have upscaled them, they have polished some of the animations, they have polished some of the enemy designs, in a way that they both feel familiar but unique. And I think that is a really good use of old assets. If you're wanting a game studio to have this pool of assets and just not pull from them, you're crazy. Every game studio does this, from Call of Duty to Skyrim and Elder Scrolls to almost every Resident Evil game. This is not a new practice. And I do get what you're saying. This is supposed to be a new IP. There shouldn't be that many borrowed resources from games of a different IP. You're both right and wrong. I personally don't see the issues with it. There are enough unique assets and unique animations and unique enemies that I have seen from the network test to give me no reason to criticize From Software from wanting to use some assets from the other games. It would be asinine for them not to. You can't expect them to want to rebuild every single thing from the bottom up when they already have something in their grab bag that will fit that mold. You can call it laziness all you want. I don't see it. Piggybacking on that idea, a lot of people are criticizing the game for the difficulty of the bosses that are in some of the catacomb-like dungeons, some of the side dungeons, and saying that they don't feel like real bosses, they feel more like mini-bosses. And that is kind of the point, I think. I don't believe that From Software is going to go and do great, like, Dragon Slayer armor level of enemy design for every single boss encounter that they do. This harkens, again, back to the Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne, where a majority of the Chalice dungeon bosses were reskins of elite enemies and stuff like that. And nobody really had a problem with that because it was procedurally generated tech. It was something that was completely optional. It wasn't in your face. Most people didn't even dive into the Chalice dungeons to know that. But in those Chalice dungeons, there was a significant amount of unique bosses, unique assets thrown in there for kind of mixing and matching that. From what I've seen with Elden Ring, they've actually taken that Chalice dungeon philosophy and upscaled it. I think, correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, every single one of the catacomb bosses and all the optional bosses are all unique from the standard enemies that you fight in the game. I don't think any of them share animations. I don't think any of them share looks to standard enemies. They're not upscaled elite versions of those enemies. And yes, while they might have a lower health pool than, say, your world bosses or your like main dungeon bosses, I don't think that they're all meant to be beat your face in difficult. I don't think they're all meant to be the next big thing competing for that spotlight. I think these are just supposed to be difficult enemies that you go into fight and get your reward. I don't think every single one of them needs to be Ornstein and Smo level hard. That's just me. I understand a lot of people are wanting that level of challenge from every single encounter they have, but I just don't think it is reasonable or feasible unless you want to make the bosses unfun and just make them super duper tanky or one-shot you, which neither one of those really brings me any level of fun. Last thing I want to bring up about the difficulty of the game is people are saying that the game is too easy overall, that most encounters are able to be avoided completely, whether that be the side dungeons or just running away from everything on horseback and powering through most encounters like that. This also ties back into magic being a little bit too strong and weapons being too weak. This is all very subjective. The game is not finalized. This is a very most likely early area within the game. You are playing on pre-made builds, which from Software's track record, they do tend to have very strong builds within those pre-made builds so that you can both get your power fantasy, and if you wanted to try something a little bit weaker, a little bit more niche, you have those options as well. They wanted to give the full breadth of player playstyle. And yes, magic might be a little bit overtuned early game just because of how magic does scale. Those could be altered in the game. Being able to run away from things has its own caveat where you're not going to be leveling up as fast or getting as many resources as you would be a player that is sticking around and going through all of those side dungeons, going through all of those mob encounters, and slowly building their character up. So that, yes, early game might be easy because you can run away from everything, power through everything, and not have too much challenge, but that could potentially make a very difficult late game for you, or make it so that you have to backtrack through early game content to get late game prepared. It's all a give and take, and I think it's way too early to tell whether the game is going to be difficult or not based on what this network test does. I think a lot of people are very happy with how the network test feels difficulty-wise, but there is still a group criticizing that it is not hard enough, and that I don't know, maybe people are concerned too many people will join the community and they won't be able to brag on people as much. Who knows? Getting away from the PvE elements, let's talk about the PvP and some of the criticisms that are coming up there. And this one is a very real concern, and one that I want as vocalized as possible. There are a significant amount of Dark Souls 3 bugs and glitches left in this game that could be very detrimental to a PvP system. From what I have heard, I haven't seen many of these, but I have heard that a lot of the Dark Souls 3 glitches are coming back, such as Estus canceling and the like. We need to make sure these are all recorded. We need to make sure these are all submitted to From Software and Bandai Namco so that they do not come back in a big capacity and make it through an entire life cycle of a game to where we are in Dark Souls 3, where these glitches are still existing and the game's no longer being patched out for that kind of content. So we need to make sure it's done early so that it can be as smooth, clean, and fair of an experience as possible. And the big criticism coming from PvP is the strength level of invaders and the not being able to invade solo players. So this is going to be kind of a twofold thing I want to talk about. I've made a few videos in the past. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. If you want to go check out my take on those, you can check out those videos. But for one, I think that the way the open world works, not having solo invasions on by default is fine. I do believe that there is an argument to be made that people don't know if they like PvP or invasions until they are engaged in invasions or PvP one way or the other. So that being taken away from solo hosts is kind of unfortunate. But again, there is an opt-in system at the very least. We're not completely removed from solo invasions, but it is still going to be heavily weighted towards co-op invasions, which the invader community is not super happy about, as they shouldn't be. Ganks are never fun. But then on the other side of the coin, you have hosts and co-op people that are upset that they are going to be taking almost the entire brunt of the invasion community on the chin. And while they do have a numbers advantage and stuff, From Software has actually given invaders a few tools to make it so that ganking isn't as punishing and anti-fun, such as the Phantom's Bloody Finger, which allows you to basically GTFO, reset, and go back in at a later time. This is going to be a hot topic for a while until the full game comes out and we actually see what they did with invasions. But as of right now, I wouldn't be surprised if invaders get a small nerf, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they leave it just how it is and throw invaders a bone. From Software has been very, very anti-invader for a very long time. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the time where they are just like, yeah, go for it, guys. We want this to be as much of a co-op and PvP experience as it is a PvE experience. We are going to actively balance the game around this aspect, and I would like to say From Software will do a good job in making sure that it is fair for all sides, both hosts, co-ops, and invaders. So only time will tell, but there's my take on it in short. So there are the biggest criticisms I've been seeing about the Elden Ring Network Test. Let me know what you all think of these opinions down in the comments below, or if you have seen or have any additional criticisms that I didn't cover in this video, let me know as well. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want more Elden Ring or Souls-like content. A lot more is coming in the future. Elden Ring comes out February 25th, guys. So big hypes there, and as the date gets closer, more and more Elden Ring content will be coming out. So much love, take care. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.